Hi, everyone, and hi, Scott. Welcome back to another episode of We Got Your Mac. It's good to be back again, and we've got a really interesting episode lined up, as always. So, Scott, you had a chat with Tom, didn't you?
For this one, I got an update from Tom Rice on his ongoing deployment project. This is now the third update for this customer, and in this one, they've moved on to networking, which, if you remember, this is a large retail organization. And so networking is definitely no small feat when it comes to that many locations. So, and as usually happens in the real world, things don't go according to plan. So it was a good discussion.
Yeah, networking quite often falls into the boring stuff that needs to be done to make everything work. And actually, well, you've heard me talk about networking. It can be really fascinating. So interested to hear what Tom's got to say on that. And then in the second half of this episode, we brought back Steve Weiner, who we heard from in season 1, talking to us about Microsoft Intune. He's got an update for us on Intune. And I thought it was interesting that there's clearly an effort going on here from Microsoft to make sure that Mac users get the same experience as Windows users, but also that Windows admins can manage Macs and Windows seamlessly. And it sounds like it's something that's going to make it a lot easier for Windows admins to manage Macs where maybe they don't have a specialist Mac admin in place.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think especially the fact that this is Microsoft and Apple really working together. Which, traditionally isn't something that we're used to, I think. But yeah, I think it's a really important update.
And I think one of the things that was interesting is we had an EUC summit a while back, and I've been looking through the data from that. And it was really interesting to note that when we asked people about what operating systems they were running in their organization, while 90-something% of them, I can't remember the number exactly, said that they were using Windows, which actually, I probably would have expected 100% to say that. So, the number was lower than expected. 80% of respondents were running Mac OS. So even if people aren't using Mac at scale in their organizations, they are at least aware that they have got Mac in there somewhere. So that number was a lot higher than I was expecting. And it does emphasize the fact that people really need to be thinking about how we create an integrated environment and a level playing field for those Mac users.
Yeah, and continuing to get closer to that unified endpoint management. That term gets thrown around a lot, but this is really a step toward being able to manage everything the same way, regardless of platform. So it's good stuff.
It's amazing how things that were, on the surface, like networking and management, may seem, a little mundane. When you dig into them, can be fascinating. So I guess on that note, we should go and listen to your conversation with Tom.
Sounds good.
Hey, Tom, welcome back to We Got Your Mac.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
We're back for another update on your ongoing deployment project with this large retail customer. They're essentially switching over to iOS devices so that they have handheld point of sale terminals to have throughout the store so they can help customers wherever they are, and offering Macs to their back office employees. So last time you were here, you had helped the customer set up Apple Business Manager and select a mobile device management tool so that you could make deploying and configuring these devices as easy as possible. So where are we now? How's it going?
Sure, yeah. Project is moving along great. And we're at the stage now where we're starting to roll out initial groups of testers. And one of the main concerns was, how do we get settings to these Macs and how do we connect them? Historically, the Macs and the iOS devices were handled by people touching them. And obviously, as you can imagine, that is inefficient, especially with whether it's in store itself for a large store or across multiple stores. You can't have an IT team drive to locations every time a setting needs to be changed or a device needs to be connected to the network. One of the benefits of using an MDM solution is that it can push out most of these settings. So when a device goes through its initial setup, it can get settings unique to that company's network. In this particular case, the MDM is actually able to push out that entire what's known as a certificate chain of trust. So the root certificate, the intermediate certificate this company is using, as well as the certificate that's unique to the device. That means when the device is turned on, it automatically connects to the network. There are no credentials required. There's no picking a Wi-Fi network, logging in, getting disconnected from the Wi-Fi, having to remember what that Wi-Fi SSID is and the username and password for that network. Because the company is using the same Wi-Fi network across all their organizations, when employees are traveling, we have their marketing team traveling or managers are moving between stores, that device connects seamlessly to whatever location they're at. So it's a really seamless experience for the users and settings that get pushed out when the device is turned on. Now, this brings up a little interesting question is, people might be asking themselves, well, wait a minute, how can a device connect to a network automatically when it's a brand new device just out of the box?
That
and it
is
has
exactly what I was about to ask you. So they take it out of the box, they open it up. How does it get that configuration to know what network to connect to?
Sure. So in this particular instance, we set up what in some cases is known as a provisioning network, which is slightly different from a guest network, which only has access to Apple servers and the MDM server. So when the user goes through the setup assistant, they're asked to select the provisioning network. They select the provisioning network, and then it gets all the settings from the MDM, which then pushes down all the certificates that are required, as well as the wireless SSIDs and other connectivity settings for the corporate network. This leads into a very interesting scenario we actually noticed in one of their stores as well. So we were rolling out beta groups in all their stores and testing the functionality before we deployed this at scale. And we noticed one of their locations, a pretty sizable location, was devices were turned on. The test user would select the provisioning network and then wouldn't connect to the MDM, and which was odd because this had worked in different locations thus far without issue. Knowing that this had worked in other locations, knowing that connectivity to both Apple and the MDM had worked elsewhere, my gut told me that this was probably an issue with this particular location. So we needed to focus our effort. We wanted to focus our efforts on solving this problem before attacking their network as a whole or any other problems with the MDM we thought would exist as a whole. So Apple has a great tool called the Mac Evaluation Utility, or MEU. And this is a tool you can download if you're part of Apple's Apple Seed for IT program, which I strongly recommend everybody out there to join. It is free to join for organizations. It gives you early access to some beta software. You don't need a developer license to do it. And one of the benefits is you get access to the MEU. The MEU it's a little piece of software that you install on the Mac, and it scans both the Mac and your network to kind of give you a very nice graphical overview of what your current status is. So I installed the software on Mac at this location, connected it to the provisioning network, and then immediately the MEU told me that I could not reach Apple's provisioning servers. And it's a very nice graphical, like I mentioned before, stoplight interface, so red, yellow, green. And a few of Apple's servers came up red. And why that's important is because if you can't reach the provisioning network, you then ultimately can't reach the MDM server, which is handing out those configuration profiles that you need to get on the network. After a couple of days of digging, the network team realized that they had reprovisioned some equipment for this location that they had taken from other decommissioned locations. And like any good IT team, when they took the network location, they took the equipment from location A to B, they reset them to factory defaults and hooked them all up again and let the configurations come down as normal. Well, in this particular instance, they were using a Wi-Fi controller, which is a device that controls and pushes out settings to all the wireless access points in the store. And when you reset the Wi-Fi controller, this particular model of Wi-Fi controller, to its default settings, it automatically turns on its own firewall, which is inadvertently blocking the ports needed to access Apple's servers. So by having that data, by doing that diagnostic using the MEU, the network team was able to see that traffic wasn't passing the Wi-Fi controller. So they simply went into the controller, turned off the firewall, made a note in their documentation that says this model turns on its firewall when set to default settings. And by resetting the devices, we were able to connect to Apple servers and ultimately the MDM and get the configuration settings that we needed.
I've been there before, so I understand. It sounds like you had the right tools to troubleshoot and got there. That's great.
Yeah, and that's always a frustration in IT, right? You expect things to be repeatable and work the same, and they won't always do it. But to your point, with simple tooling, we can find out the answers quick. You don't need complicated, Wireshark diagnostics and looking at network traffic across all these ports. Again, back to the horses versus zebras analogy. Sometimes the simplest answer is the easiest one and the quickest fix, and that's ultimately the goal of MDM too. We talked about before about pushing out all these settings. We want the same settings to be pushed out every single time. So there is not that chance of somebody installing the wrong certificate or fat fingering a password and wondering why this doesn't work when it works for 99 out of 100 devices.
Well, sounds like you guys are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Thanks for the update, and we'll check in with you soon.
All right, Scott, thanks for having me.
Your employees love Mac. Its sleek design and intuitive interface make work a breeze. But for you, the IT manager, Mac can feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. Integration headaches, security concerns, the dreaded migration process. Sound familiar? SHI gets it. We're not just another tech vendor. We are your strategic partner in building a Mac-centric workplace that works for everyone. Our complimentary Mac readiness assessment is like an X-ray for your IT environment, revealing the exact steps you need to take for a successful Mac deployment. We'll guide you through security, locking down Mac's built-in defenses so your data stays safe, deployment, streamlining your setup so Macs hit the ground running, integration, making sure Mac plays nice with your existing systems, migration, moving from old devices to new without losing a beat, and more. We'll tackle any Mac challenges you throw our way. But that's not all. For a limited time, eligible customers who complete the assessment get a free trial of top-tier MDM solutions like Jamf Pro or Conji. It's like a test drive before you buy the car. SHI isn't just about selling you Macs. We're about making Mac work for you. Zero-touch deployment? Check. Effortless integration with your existing MDM? Double check. Empowered, productive Mac users from day one? You bet. Don't just manage Mac, master it. Discover how SHI's Mac Readiness Assessment can unlock the full potential of your Apple fleet. Contact us today or visit shi.com/Mac assessment. Your Mac power future starts now. We got your Mac covered.
So today, Scott and I are joined by Steve Weiner, who you may remember from episode 9 of season 1 of We Got Your Mac, where we talked to him in quite a lot of detail about how to manage your Macs in a mixed Mac and Windows environment. We've asked Steve to come back to give us a little bit of an update on enrolling Macs in Microsoft Intune. But first of all, Steve, before we get onto that, congratulations. I gather you are now a Microsoft MVP.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to explain to us why Microsoft have awarded you the MVP status, what it means, and what they've given it to you for?
Yeah, sure. Well, why? I really don't know, right? I thought it was a mistake. No. So the Microsoft MVP program is all about identifying subject matter experts in different technologies that Microsoft has. So more from a practitioner standpoint and contribution to the community. So over the past year, I've been running a lot of community content, contributions as far as blogs, videos, custom solutions. And this May I was awarded it. I'm one of less than, I believe, there's less than 100 globally in my space who have the MVP title. So I'm really proud of it and excited to, continue to help folks.
Well, we're very honored to have somebody so important and respected in the Microsoft community joining us today. If you can just give us a little bit of an overview of kind of how things were before with Intune and Mac, and then maybe we can start to talk about what's changed.
Yeah, I think Microsoft has been on a very steady trajectory. You could say aggressive when it comes to managing Mac with their platforms, and both in terms of endpoint management, security. Essentially, they want to, I think, be able to provide an environment where if you're managing both Mac and Windows, which many organizations do, you can have as much parity as possible. So you're not stuck with having like the lesser of the two platforms. And that was very steady, a lot of features coming on a regular basis. But this year, in fact, a few months ago, Microsoft took a fairly large leap and worked with Apple to create something called Platform SSO, which is very game-changing in the Microsoft Mac space.
So the first thing I'm going to say is we're on a mission to explain all of our TLAs. So SSO, single sign-on. And why does this matter?
So in the Windows world, one thing that changed around the time Windows 10 came out is the ability to join a PC to the organization's cloud environment right out of the box. So many folks use Microsoft Office, they use Exchange, and their users have email addresses, and they can use those email addresses when they boot a device to just self-join an environment. And what's very interesting is, of course, because Microsoft makes Windows, so they can build that feature into Windows out of the box. There's really no friction there. And for years, organizations have struggled to get Mac computers to, I'll say, be a part of the corporate environment. Macs don't really join a corporate domain, even though there's been a lot of tricks around it to kind of make that happen. So now, in the first official capacity, a Mac using Microsoft credentials out of the box can join the cloud environment the same way a PC would.
So this is Platform SSO using Microsoft's Entra ID, which something that somehow I missed. Entra ID is just the rebrand of Azure Active Directory, right?
Azure Active Directory, yeah. It's a struggle because Microsoft has a long history of making changes, but not everywhere. And I spend a lot of time in code, and in the firmware and code, it's still called Azure AD. So it depends on what time of the day I call it Entra and when I call it Azure. But yeah, it's okay to just say Azure Active Directory. And to answer your question, yeah. So that's essentially what it is.
Got it. And so this essentially allows the user to log into their Mac using their Microsoft credentials.
Yes.
That also logs them into all of their Office and Outlook and all of those applications as well.
Yes. More importantly, taking a quick detour to the tech side, there doesn't have to be a local user on the Mac. So by signing in with Microsoft credentials, it is a cloud account. Like the Mac believes there's a local account, but it's all managed through Entra ID or Azure Active Directory. So that's really important as well. Yes, you're going to have the single sign-on experience to all your Microsoft apps or whatever else you have set up, but organizations with Mac tend to worry about local accounts, and that's no longer going to be an issue with this.
Okay, so when you set it up with the Microsoft credentials, you don't actually create a local account on the Mac like you normally would, or do you still do it and it's just kind of there in the background?
Well, so it gets created, but it's managed by Entra, the same way a PC would work. So with a PC, you sign in with your Office 365 or your email address, and a local account is placed there, but it's managed directly by the cloud. It's the same situation here.
This makes it kind of much more seamless from a management point of view, probably particularly for Windows admins, makes it less scary having the Macs around. There's the benefits to the end user of they're getting the same level of service, same experience as the Windows users. Not all of them might necessarily think that that's benefit if they've been used to having a little bit of autonomy and independence. What's this going to do to help you with that decision making? How's this going to help an organization to decide, maybe we're feeling a bit braver about bringing Macs into our environment?
Yeah, I think it's a massive leap forward in, again, going back to that trajectory of Microsoft pushing for, hey, bring Macs in. We can deploy a lot of these policies, these apps. I think this just takes it to that next level of saying, well, everything they do with Windows Autopilot and the automatic enrollment, now you can fold that in as well. So, hey, not only will management of the Macs not be an issue and you'll be able to have them in one nice place, deployment as well, right? Same methods for deployment. So yeah, I think it makes just a tremendous impact on those who, might be shying away from it, specifically, using the Microsoft platform for management.
So this sounds like it makes it very seamless at setup for any new Mac. Can this be applied to a Mac that's already been deployed and already in use, or would you have to wipe it and start fresh?
No, you can deploy it. If you have a Mac and you would enroll it into Microsoft Intune, you would be able to deploy policy to an existing device, prompt the end user to sign in with their email address. It's a very standard looking. I think a lot of folks, whether they're Windows or Mac users, everyone's kind of used to the Office sign-in pop-up now, the Microsoft 365. So yeah, after a sign-in, that's really it. The policy takes over and we're good to go. So yeah, they did a good job with that as well.
Obviously, one of the things we've talked about quite a lot during both season one and in this season as well, that comes up regularly, is around security. So for security teams, is there a benefit to them of this integration and this use of Intune, and I guess this standardization across the two platforms?
Yeah, I think you mentioned something before about Apple Mac users having a bit of autonomy, right? And I think that's always been a sticking point with IT. In the PC world, there's been a massive push in the last 5 years or so to encourage folks to go from traditional local account joined to a domain, trying to push them towards cloud native, we would refer to it as, because it's just a lot more secure. I mean, unfortunately, the events of 2020 and the global pandemic brought that to light, right? All of a sudden, you had organizations that did not have line of sight to their organization's network. So how do you secure that? And that was the answer. So now with Macs, you have a similar solution where immediately out of the box, there is no point where, as a user, I have local administrative privileges on that device. And that not only enables security, it enables better, more zero-touch deployment options. When companies say they want to use zero-touch, that's often a security sticking point. So now that's one more thing we can mitigate by using this.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how much everybody talks about all of the different kind of threats, all of the different security risks. At the end of the day, I think everybody working in technology knows that it's the person sitting in the chair that is the biggest security risk, not even through malicious intent.
No, just humans. Humans by nature are risky.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, this sounds like for organizations that are using Intune, this sounds like it's going to be a real positive for them if they're thinking about expanding or introducing Mac or expanding the Mac footprint within their organization.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off something I spoke about last time I was on when I was talking about the average tech savvy level of our users. Remember, our users are consumers, so they are trained by mostly Apple, and they use iPhones, they use these devices. So asking it, a lot of folks sometimes fear change adoption, but when we think about, well, what are we asking a user to do? We're asking them to do the same thing they would do if they bought a Mac personally, if they bought an iPad personally. They know how to open it up, expect to be prompted to sign in, and go from there. So again, this is just one more step towards, we don't have to really educate users. It's going to be a very natural thing for them, right? So that's just another positive.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, Steve. We really appreciate it. And obviously, we'll be offering everybody your signed photos now that you're a Microsoft MVP. Thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
So two really, really great segments that on the surface may not seem completely related, but really at the core of both of them is trying to simplify the overall experience for employees, whether, the networking thing, being able to just move between locations and devices just connect seamlessly, and then, being able to access your devices with your Microsoft credentials. All of this just gets back to the core of making things easier for the end user.
That's really important because removing friction from any process is key to having happy and productive employees. And we all know and have seen the evidence and the anecdotes that happy customers are actually dependent on happy employees. You have to look after your employees. And, we don't want to put barriers in the way of our employees working effectively. I mean, we talked about that when we talked to Bo about accessibility, that the technology should be an enabler, but that doesn't just apply to people with very specific needs. It applies to everybody doing their day job. Let's make it as easy as possible for them to do it, so they focus on doing their job, not making the technology work. We don't want to have to spend 15 minutes trying to get our device to connect to the network and then ring the help desk and then have to go around and find somebody at the help desk to press something on our device when we go to a new location. And I think it's interesting that the tools are there to help with it. I mean, solving those networking problems without using the Mac evaluation utility, that could have taken quite a long time to sort out.
Yeah, with a company this big, especially with this many locations, and we're talking retail stores and even back office, planning ahead to get that networking set so that devices can move between locations seamlessly. With an organization that big, I think you risk having sort of a disjointed network, and then say, a bunch of devices need to be moved to another store and somebody unpacks them and they just don't connect and they don't know how to connect them. It's the planning ahead. And then, like you said, having the right tools to make sure that everything does work. I mean, they could have spent weeks trying to figure out why Apple servers were blocked, but having the right tool to get the job done, they did it.
As a bit of information, we will have a link in the show notes and the blog post to where you can download that Mac evaluation utility from SHI. And also, if you don't want to use it on your own, this episode is supported by our Mac readiness assessment. So if you don't want to use the tool on your own, then you've got an option to engage with our team who can help you use it, just as they've been helping this client. The interesting thing that came up when we were talking to Steve is very similar to what came up when we were talking to Brad and John last episode, which is that it doesn't matter what we put in place in terms of technology, the end user is still the weak point, because humans are fallible. Machines follow instructions mostly in a predictable way. Humans are very much less predictable.
Yeah, Microsoft rolling this out for Macs, I think it not only does it create that parity, that unified endpoint management that everybody's chasing, but increases security. And I think, it speaks to the need for more security measures like this, so that users are using presumably a protected login. If you're using Azure, you're using your Microsoft credentials, hopefully you're also using Authenticator, so that they have their device with their authentication code to log in. Just increases the entire security of it. But I think it also speaks to sort of the need for more training. And I think a lot of organizations realize this, but like you said, the person using the device is going to be the weak point. So trying to educate people what the threats are, what they look like, I think that there's definitely a need for that.
Yeah, and it's hard. And we talked to Kristin Hubler in episode 8 of season 1 about change management and adoption. I mean, it's really hard to get all of these messages across because there's so much information coming at people all the time. Again, it's down to making it frictionless, making the experience as consistent as possible, so that if somebody does need to ask a colleague or the person sitting next to them, how do I do this? It's not going to be a different answer for each one of them, because custom and practice is very definitely not the way to learn what the correct process for doing something is. That can lead to all sorts of problems. And knowing that there's just one solution, everybody just does things the same way, is really going to help. I think there are an awful lot of questions which probably we're not in a position to answer about how you provide accessible material to your end users, because not everybody wants this information in the same way. And the same thing is going to go with, how we go about educating and training our users to make sure they understand the correct process, and also that they recognize when something's not right about that process.
So really, really great discussions. And that's it for this week. For any of our listeners or viewers, if you're interested in any of these tools or additional information, make sure to go to wegotyourmac.com. We've got the blog posts, the Mac readiness assessment links, all that good stuff. And we'll see you in the next episode.